Good morning and welcome to Greece. My name's Andrew and these are my 10 learnings about Greece and the Greeks. I live in Greece, I have a Greek wife and I love exploring Greece. Today I'm planning to walk from this point here. This is the Arkadiko Bridge, the oldest bridge still in use in the world. It's 3,300 years old. So we're going to walk from this point up to a point over there, the Acropolis of Kazarma, unknown, unexplored, never been archaeologically assessed, but fantastically important, I feel. And as we walk up there, I'm going to tell you about these 10 things I've learned. So I hope it's an interesting and useful fact-filled video. So just along our walk, we come across the first stop, which is these Mycenaean Tholos tombs. These are 3,300 years old, and the Mycenaeans were burying people here. It shows what an important area this is. But it makes me think about modern Greeks, and to me, as a foreigner, how contradictory modern Greeks can be. And I don't mean this to be controversial, it probably will be, but the Greeks sit there and they say to you, there are two types of people in the world, those who are Greek and those who wish they were Greek. And I completely agree with them. I would love to be Greek for various reasons. But at the same time, they will sit there in their Cafe Neo, the coffee shop, all day telling you that, bitterly actually, how bad Greece is, how they wish they had other options, how the country's been destroyed. And I agree and I don't agree. I get it. Life has been very tough for some Greeks, particularly since the Greek economic crisis, the young in particular. But at the same time, Greece is not, in my opinion, and I have a broad spectrum of experience, as bad as people think. I've lived in several countries and Greece is honestly the best of them. The services in Greece, the infrastructure in Greece, the people in Greece are just fabulous. And I don't understand why people get so wrapped up in just how bad it is here. I made a video recently, I mentioned just how good the Greek healthcare system was, and oh my god, the number of negative comments I got from Greeks about that. But the fact is, it's better than the UK system, and I could go on, I could list umpteen things in Greece which are better, in my opinion, than they are in Northern Europe. The cost of living, yes, it's going up here, it's difficult for people, but it is across Europe, and I refuse to accept that Greece is any worse than other areas of Europe. I'm sure I'll get lots of comments arguing with me on this, and I'm not trying to argue, I'm just saying Greece is brilliant and it's no worse than anywhere else in Europe at the moment. It really isn't. Lesson number 2 is that ancient Greece is not just about perhaps what people would imagine ancient Greece to be. The Parthenon, the Acropolis in Athens, Socrates, Plato, classical togas, etc. Before the Roman times, 400 BC. No, Greece has a much prouder history than that and goes back to almost 2000 BC when you have the Minoans on Crete. And then here you have the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were an amazing civilization. From about 1650, when the Minoans began to collapse, the Mycenaeans became dominant. And they were the people who invented, really, mythology, the Greek mythology that we see today. Hercules, Theseus, Perseus, the key players in this. And Greece is so much more than just what is known as the classical or Hellenic period. It has a history of civilization going back so much further. And it's just amazing because when we talk about civilization, they were doing it 2,000 years before anyone else in Europe. Yes, there are other civilizations, the Hittites, for example, in the Middle East, etc. But the Greeks were the first to do it in Europe, and they were doing it 2,000 years really before anyone else, because then the Romans came along. Just amazing place. And you can see here, all around me, the history. You can see behind me fabulous views, and we've only just started, and I love exploring Greece, and to do that I do a lot of driving. And my lesson number 3 is that Greece has a really bad reputation amongst foreigners for driving, but I don't find that's true. I think Greece is a joy to drive around, and I think you should be confident to do it too. Yes, you have the odd incident. You'll be driving along the road at 70 kilometres an hour and literally 20 metres in front of you an agricultural vehicle will pull out with a local and trundle along at 13 kilometres an hour for the next half mile, and you're just ready to overtake them, and then suddenly they veer off to the left without any indication and off some side road. So you have to be careful. But the roads here are fantastic. It's easy to get around. I mean, Google Maps is your friend. I wouldn't advise driving in Athens. You don't need to. It's not that you shouldn't, it's just you don't need to, because there's a fantastic public transport system. But you want to get outside Athens, down into the Peloponnese, up towards Delphi or Lamia. The roads are brilliant. Yes, there are tolls on the major roads. For me, from here, I live about 100 kilometres, 180 kilometres from Athens. For me to go to Athens, with the toll roads, it's about 10 euros. So it's not cheap, but the roads are brilliant. They're largely empty except in August, and do not be scared about getting in a car and driving around Greece and exploring. It's fantastic. After we climb this rather steep hill, Marcel and I will probably go for lunch, and this brings me on to Greek food. Now, I actually used to work in the food industry, so I perhaps have a slightly different perspective on this. Greek food is fantastic, and not necessarily for the dishes. The dishes are simple. That doesn't make them bad. They are simple dishes, but they are made with amazing raw materials. And if you ask anyone in the food industry what makes good food, they will say great raw materials. Greece doesn't just have great raw materials, it has astonishing, amazing raw materials. If you eat a tomato here and you come from Northern Europe, you will never taste a tomato like you do in Greece, in Northern Europe, because they just can't deliver them. They certainly can't grow them. And that's the point in Greece. You have all this fantastic food here, which is grown locally, produced fresh, and then put into these simple dishes. And it's the raw materials here that make Greek food so good, whether it comes from the sea or the land. It's fantastic. So my lesson number 5 is that most people think of Greece as beaches and coastline, and you'd be right in a sense. It has the longest coastline in Europe, 14,500 kilometres in total. And put that in perspective, Africa, the continent of Africa, has a coastline which is only 18,000 kilometres. So we have a very long coastline here. But as you can see behind me, Greece is mountainous. It's 80% mountains, Greece. The landmass of Greece is very rugged. And for people who want to explore, who like hiking or mountain biking or cycling or just getting out and about in general and seeing something that they'll never normally see and have the opportunity to see, Greece is perfect for it. And there aren't really right to roam laws as you have in some parts of Europe, but I've never had anyone say to me, get off this land. As long as you're sensible, you don't destroy things, you stick to the paths where possible. It is brilliant to explore, and you can do so relatively safely. Yes, you have to take water with you. You should have walking shoes if you can, but it is a fantastic place to explore if you get away from the coastline and the beaches. This brings me to number 6. Greece is so much more than the islands and Athens. And rightly and inevitably, a lot of people, their first visit here, they'll go to the islands or they'll go to Athens or they'll do a combination of both. But there's so much more to Greece than just those places. Come down to the Peloponnese, explore the Peloponnese. We have everything in the Peloponnese. We're 2 hours from Athens. We have beaches, we have castles, we have Roman ruins, we have Hellenic ruins, we have Mycenaean ruins. It goes back 3,000 years, the history here. We have hikes, we have walks, we have cycles. And that's just the Peloponnese. If you head up north, past Delphi towards Lamia and Saloniki, there's so much that mainland Greece has to offer beyond Athens. And unless you get out of Athens and away from the islands, you'll never really understand Greece and explore Greece in the way that I've had the opportunity to. And it's just brilliant to understand this place a little bit more. So my lesson number 7 is that Greece is fantastic to visit all year round. Yes, a lot of people come here in the summer. Of course, they want the beaches, they want the guaranteed weather, and you get that. But actually, if you come off season, particularly late September, October, November, and then March, April, May, you will probably enjoy Greece even more than you will in the summer. You don't have the extreme suffocating heat, and you don't have the crowds, and it allows you to get out and explore Greece in ways that you wouldn't normally be able to. Between October and April, all the sites are half price, so you save a little bit of money. And this is my first hike in the autumn. It's still a little bit hot, it's mid-September, but I wouldn't do it in July or August because it's just way too hot. Even now I'm sweating, it's 25, 26 degrees, but it is perfect for exploring. And ultimately, as you can see, I'm exploring, and here is the Acropolis of Kazarma. And this wall here is a Hellenic wall, built about 400 BC. So it's an interesting place. See, it gets interesting because if you know what you're looking for, this tower here is a Byzantine tower, so probably built maybe 12 or 1300 AD. And then the wall next to it, this wall along here, is a Hellenic wall, built, as I said, about 400 BC. So this has a long history, this Acropolis, as they often do. An Acropolis means high fortress or high place. But you see, it would have been very, very hard work to build this up here. There would have been a very specific reason for doing so. Obviously, defensive military reason. But it brings me on to my lesson number 8. The Greeks are really, really hard working, and I mean it. You know, you come in the summer, you see them working hard, you say, as I used to, oh, they probably work for 4 months a year, they make the money, then they have the rest of the year off. And they all, of course, have siestas in the afternoon. Well, trust me, anywhere where it's as hot as it is in Greece, you work in the morning, you sleep at lunchtime, and then you work again in the afternoon and into the evening. And the Greeks do that all the time. But moreover, most Greeks will have 2 or 3 jobs. In the summer, they'll work 12, 16, 18 hours a day to make ends meet, to make their money. And then in the winter, they won't stop working, they'll have another job. Now, that may be in Greece, maybe they go to Athens, or it may be overseas. I know one guy, he packs up, he goes to Iceland and works on a fishing trawler for 5 months. It doesn't get harder than that. So take it from me, the Greeks have a hard life and they work very, very hard for it. But boy, they have some amazing places to visit too. Just astonishing. Now, my number 9 is the Greeks were speaking ancient Greek long before they were writing ancient Greek. What do I mean by that? Well, the writing came along in about 800 BC, round about the time of Homer, and the Iliad and the Odyssey were written. And that was really the first time ancient Greek as a written language existed. But prior to that, they were speaking what would have been recognised as ancient Greek. And they were doing so right back into the Mycenaean period, probably about 1800 BC, so 1,000 years before they started really writing it in a form that's understood now. But that's not to take anything away from the writing, because one of the reasons that Greece is the bedrock of European cultural society and history is because they were writing stuff down thousands of years before anyone else, and in a consistent, recognisable, legible form. In Mycenaean times, they had something called Linear B. It was a different form of writing, and a lot of it still has to be deciphered. But within that, it is known that some of the ancient Greek words were commonly written down in Linear B. And it was Linear B and the Mycenaean times and the language they were speaking at the time, this early ancient Greek, that gave spawn to the early myths and legends of Greece. Now, some of them may have come from earlier times and earlier people. Hercules, for example, was almost certainly a derivation of warrior stories that existed in Indo-European times. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see here, the Mycenaeans were here. Then the Hellenic Greeks were here 1,000 years later. Then, 1,000 years after that, the Byzantines were here. And now, almost 1,000 years after them, I'm here. So just before we get to my number 10, why was this actually here? Well, very simple. Over the hill here, through this gap that you can see, you have the ancient Mycenaean capital of Mycenae. And the road ran through that gap, down the hill, and past this point here. And they built a defensive Acropolis here, effectively between here and the port city of Epidavros, which was a key port, commercial and military port for them, to protect access to the Mycenaean capital should there be any attack or invasion. And later on, in Hellenic times, it was adopted and adapted into the Acropolis that you largely see today, because it was the border between Argos and Epidavros. But I think it was the border between Argos and Epidavros partly because it's strategically important. We're in a gap here, I don't know if you can see, but there is a narrow valley, you see, that the road has to run through, so you can control everything that comes through that road. And partly because there was already an Acropolis here and they just merely adapted it, and then the Byzantines did the same 1,000 years later. So this is a geographically and politically strategic point, but it was the Mycenaeans who first identified this hill as important and built an Acropolis up here in about 15 or 1600 BC. So my lesson number 10, probably again a little bit controversial, is that contrary to popular opinion, not all European words, even if they appear to, have derivations in ancient Greek. Of course, some of them do, but the reality is that Greek, Latin, Celtic, Germanic, Hungo, Nordic, all of these languages have a common ancestor, the Proto-Indo-European language, and there are hundreds of words which people will naturally and rightly attribute to being derived from the Greek or ancient Greek equivalents, which actually have much older roots and have as a result, a common ancestor feeding down into these languages. And I think it's because the Greeks were the first to write, and write specifically, that it is assumed that these words came from Greek because they were the first ones to write them down. But for example, if we take the word pater, meaning father, vater, you know, it's common across Europe, and it's been demonstrated by scholars that this word was being used 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. The same with mater, or mother, with other family relations such as son and daughter, and gods as well. Deus pater, which means sky god, was the key god for the Indo-Europeans, and Deus became Zeus, and obviously also means deity. So I could go on and on and on. The number 2 is a particularly good one across Europe, but then also in a similar fashion, words which didn't exist in Proto-Indo-European language aren't common across Europe. The sea would be one of them, because the Proto-Indo-Europeans were a migration of culture and people from the Russian steppes, and they'd never seen the sea, so there was no word for sea. And there's no commonality across European languages for the word sea. So I'm not suggesting for a minute to my Greek friends who are about to get very upset with me that a lot of words didn't come from ancient Greek. I'm merely suggesting that a lot of words that are assumed to come from ancient Greek actually have older common ancestry origins which existed before the Mycenaeans were speaking what we would consider to be ancient Greek. So there we are, 10 things I've learnt about Greece and the Greeks, associated perhaps loosely with this walk. I could list 100, to be honest. Some of these I might expand out into their own videos because I think they're worth it. I'm sure I'm going to get some comments that justify that, but I hope you've enjoyed. It's very difficult actually to hike in September when it's warm, and to talk and to think. So I hope this video has been at least entertaining, and please watch some of my other videos. I look forward to doing more for you soon. Thank you very much.